I knew something was off the moment I stepped into the lobby at Harborline Consulting. Not because anyone said anything, because no one did. The receptionist wouldn't meet my eyes, not deliberately, just carefully. Before I could even set my bag down, my phone buzzed. An email. No greeting, no explanation. Just a subject line that read, Annual Performance Review, 9:15 a.m., Ridgeway Conference Room. No agenda. At Harborline, meetings without agendas aren't discussions, they're decisions. I had just closed my 4th consecutive quarter ahead of target. The client expansion had been approved weeks earlier. My compensation cycle was scheduled to finalize in less than 2 days. That timing wasn't subtle. I walked the hallway slowly, not out of fear, out of awareness. People looked busy in a way that felt practiced. One analyst I'd mentored for years suddenly found a reason to step into an empty office. That's when I knew. I stopped by my desk first. Not to pack, not yet. I opened the drawer where I kept the contract, the amended one, the version no one reread after last year's review. I flipped directly to the clause, the quiet one. No bold text, no dramatic language, just conditions. I checked the language once, then checked the date on my calendar. 2 days. That was all the distance they thought they needed. I closed the folder, slipped it into my bag, and walked toward Ridgeway Conference Room. The blinds were already drawn. Stephen Cole was seated at the table when I entered. Legal wasn't beside him. They were somewhere else. That mattered. He didn't ask me to sit. Laura, he said calmly, this is about alignment. That word always sounds harmless until it's used on you. He told me the decision was effective immediately, that my role was being eliminated, that it wasn't about performance. I nodded once, not because I agreed, because interruption would have helped him. He slid the paper across the table. Termination, no cause cited. I didn't read the paragraph. I read the date. That's when I understood what they thought they were doing. They believed calling it a review would protect them. They believed acting early would save them money. What they didn't realize was that the language they avoided was the language that protected them. And by avoiding it, they had already triggered something else. I thanked Stephen for his time, stood up, and walked out without asking another question. I wasn't leaving confused. I was leaving early enough for the words to do their work. I didn't react after I left the room, not in the hallway, not in the elevator. Reaction would have been easy, useful even, but reaction wasn't necessary. When someone tells you a decision is final, they're not waiting to hear how you feel. They're watching how you accept it. I walked back to my desk slowly. Not to pack, not yet. I needed the quiet. Harborline looked the same as it always had. Lights on, screens glowing, people moving with purpose. That's the strange thing about endings. They're invisible to everyone else. I closed my laptop and opened the drawer again. The contract was still there, exactly where I'd left it. I didn't rush this time. I let the pages rest open long enough for the room to feel still. Then I read, not emotionally, precisely. The clause was unchanged. No edits, no reinterpretation. Just language. Clear language. Termination without cause during a defined compensation window triggered protections. Not discussion, not review. Protections. They hadn't said cause. They'd said alignment. That mattered. Alignment is not cause. Alignment is preference. Preference doesn't override language. I checked the date again. 48 hours. That was the margin they thought they had. They believed the word review would cover the timing. They believed form could soften consequence. They were wrong. I closed the folder and put it back in the drawer. There was no need to take it with me. The words weren't going anywhere. Before leaving my desk, I sent one email. Short, careful, to the internal compliance desk. No accusations, no narrative. Just the agreement, the termination notice, and one line. Please confirm whether this action is classified as termination without cause. That was it. No urgency, no pressure. Language doesn't need either. I stood up, picked up my bag, and walked out. No one stopped me. That's how you know they believe the matter is closed. Outside, the air felt cooler, quieter. I walked for a while, not to clear my head, to let the noise drain. The city didn't know anything had changed. Cars passed, people talked, coffee shops stayed open, all of it continuing without interruption. I sat on a bench and waited, not for a response, for my breathing to slow, By the time my phone buzzed, I wasn't startled. It was a confirmation. Receipt acknowledged. Review in progress. No timeline. That was fine. If there had been nothing there, they would have said so. Instead, they were reading. That night, I slept lightly. Not restless, just aware. Awareness doesn't disturb sleep. Resistance does. The next morning, I woke without urgency. No rehearsed conversations. No explanations forming. Whatever happened next would come from the words, not from me. I made coffee and stood by the window. Watched the day begin. Somewhere inside Harborline, someone was reading more carefully than they had the day before. Someone was checking dates, comparing language. They wouldn't feel alarmed yet, just cautious. That was enough. I didn't need resolution. Not yet. This part of the story was about letting language catch up to timing. And language, when it's written well, always does. Nothing happened right away. That was expected. When language starts working, the first response is usually silence. Silence doesn't mean dismissal, it means attention. Inside Harborline, someone would have opened the email without forwarding it. They would have read the line twice, not because it was unclear, because it was narrow. Narrow questions leave less room to move. I spent the morning doing small things. Laundry, dishes, emails that didn't matter. Keeping the day ordinary kept my breathing steady. By mid-afternoon, another message arrived. Still short, still neutral. They confirmed receipt of the materials. They asked for clarification. Whether any performance issues had been documented within the last review cycle. I read the question slowly, not to consider how to answer, to notice what it revealed. If they had records, they wouldn't be asking. I replied with 3 words. None to date. No elaboration. Elaboration creates openings. Facts close them. After that, the silence returned. But it felt different, more focused. This was the stage where someone would start mapping timelines. Who approved what? When the cycle was set? Which version of the agreement was active? Those maps are never drawn quickly. They're drawn carefully because they tend to point back to someone. I took a walk as evening came on. The sky was already dimming. Streetlights came on one by one, like a slow acknowledgement. I didn't think about Stephen. Not with anger, not with curiosity. He was no longer part of the process. Once compliance takes over, intent stops mattering. Only record does. That night, sleep came easily. No dreams replaying the meeting. No arguments forming in the dark. The language was doing its work without me. The next morning, my phone buzzed early. A new email. This one slightly longer. Still calm. They asked whether I would be available for a brief call to confirm classification. Classification is a careful word. It means they're no longer asking what happened. They're deciding what it means. I replied that I was available later that day. No urgency, no conditions. When the call came, there were 2 voices, both measured, both professional. They didn't apologize. They didn't justify. They asked whether the termination had been communicated as without cause. I answered simply, yes. They asked whether the meeting had been described as a review. Yes. There was a pause. Not long, but deliberate. That pause told me they'd reached the same conclusion I had. They thanked me for the clarification and said they would follow up. No next steps, no reassurance. That's how you know the outcome has narrowed. After the call, I put the phone down and didn't pick it up again. There was nothing left to add. I noticed how calm the afternoon felt. Not relieved, just steady. I wasn't waiting for vindication. I was waiting for alignment. That evening, I opened the contract again, not to search for anything new, to confirm there was nothing ambiguous. There wasn't. The language had been careful because it had been written for moments like this. Moments when someone tries to avoid saying the word that matters. 'Cause without it, the structure shifts. I closed the folder and let the night settle. Somewhere, inside Harborline, the tone of the conversation had changed. No longer about preference. No longer about narrative. About consequence. Quiet consequence. And those take time, but they don't reverse. The shift didn't arrive with news. It arrived with restraint. No one followed up immediately after the call. No clarifying emails. No attempt to soften anything. That told me the review phase was over. They weren't gathering information anymore. They were aligning it. Inside Harborline, this would have meant a change in tone. Less conversation, more reading. Someone would be comparing language now, not interpretations, words. What had been said in the room? What had been written in the agreement? What hadn't been documented? Those gaps matter. Gaps are where consequences form. I spent the day quietly. Not distracted, contained. I didn't check my phone often. There was nothing to monitor. When things reach this stage, updates don't arrive as alerts. They arrive as confirmations. Late in the afternoon, an email came through from compliance. Not long, not evasive. They confirmed the termination had been classified as involuntary and without documented cause. No emphasis, just record. They said the compensation terms were under internal review and that further communication would follow. That was the first time the word compensation appeared. Not as a threat, as a fact. I didn't respond. There was nothing to correct. Silence now was alignment. That evening I walked again. The city was settling into itself. Traffic thinning. Lights softening. I thought about how often people confuse clarity with confrontation. This wasn't confrontation. It was structure asserting itself. Structure doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't argue. It waits until everything else stops. Later that night, I slept deeply. Not because the outcome was certain, because the process was. The next morning felt slower. Not in time, in pressure. I noticed how my body no longer braced when notifications came through. No anticipation, no defense, just awareness. Around midday, another email arrived. This one carefully worded. They acknowledged the clause by reference, not by name. They stated their understanding of its application given the classification. They asked for patience while internal approvals were completed. Approvals, plural. That told me the conversation had moved upward. Higher levels don't like surprises, but they accept records. I replied with one line. Understood. Nothing more. That was enough. The afternoon passed quietly. No calls, no messages. Just the sense that something irreversible had been accepted. That evening, I made dinner and ate without distraction. No screens, no checking. I realized then how rarely I'd done that before. Even meals had felt provisional, waiting for the next demand. Now there was none. I didn't feel victorious. Victory implies opposition. This felt more like gravity returning things to where they belonged. Before bed, I opened the notebook once more. Not to write. To confirm I didn't need to. The page stayed blank. That felt right. Some chapters don't need narration once the structure holds. I turned off the light and let the quiet finish the day. Whatever came next would arrive in its own time, and when it did, it wouldn't need emphasis, because by then, everything important would already be understood. The acknowledgement didn't come as an admission. It came as procedure. By the time the next message arrived, the language had changed again. More careful, more formal. They no longer referred to the situation as a review outcome. They referred to it as a separation event. Words matter when responsibility shifts. A separation event has rules attached to it. Those rules don't ask how anyone feels. They ask what applies. The email outlined next steps. Not demands, not negotiations. Steps. Internal review completion. Compensation reconciliation. Timeline for confirmation. No dates yet. Just sequence. I read it once and set the phone down. There was no advantage in reading it again. That afternoon passed quietly. I noticed how much time opens up when you're no longer waiting to be evaluated. Evaluation creates tension even when it's positive. This was different. There was nothing to prove. In the early evening, another message followed. Shorter. They requested confirmation of my preferred contact method for future correspondence. That question answered several others. They weren't planning to resolve this casually. They were formalizing it. I replied with my email address. Nothing more. As night settled, I thought about Stephen again. Not with blame, with distance. He had been the messenger, not the author. That doesn't excuse anything. But it explains the tone. People sound calm when they're delivering someone else's decision. Later that night, I reviewed the timeline one last time. Not to check for mistakes. To confirm alignment. Meeting labeled review. Termination effective immediately. No documented cause. Clause applicability was no longer theoretical. It was active. I slept well. Not because I felt secure, because there was nothing left to manage. The next morning, I woke to a message marked high importance. That was new. Still restrained, but marked. They confirmed the internal review had concluded. They stated their interpretation of the clause matched mine. That sentence was precise. It didn't say they agreed. It said their interpretation matched. Agreement is emotional. Interpretation is legal. They said a formal notice would follow. Timeline pending. No apology. No justification. None was needed. I didn't respond immediately. There was no rush now. Later that day, I replied with a simple acknowledgement. Thank you for the update. That was it. I spent the rest of the day doing things that didn't require attention. Reading, walking, letting the air move. I felt no urge to explain anything to anyone. That urge had belonged to the earlier version of me, the one still negotiating space. This version was already standing in it. That night, I sat with the lights low and let the quiet stay. There was nothing left to clarify, nothing left to request. What remained was process, and process, once acknowledged, moves forward without drama. The formal notice arrived without ceremony. No greeting, no framing language. Just a document attached and a line that said it was being shared for record. I opened it slowly. Not because I was nervous, because rushing gives weight to things that don't need it. The document confirmed what had already been decided. Termination classified as involuntary, without cause. Clause applicability acknowledged. Compensation subject to reconciliation per the agreement. No commentary, just structure. I read through it once, then closed the file. There was nothing to dispute. The language was clean. That's how you know the outcome is settled. Messy language invites response. This didn't. I saved the document to a folder I wouldn't open often, not because I wanted to forget it, because it didn't require revisiting. The rest of the day passed without interruption. No follow-ups, no calls. I didn't interpret that as avoidance. It was respect for sequence. Later that evening, I made tea and sat near the window. The city lights were steady. Not celebratory, not dim. Just present. I thought about how often people expect closure to feel like relief. This didn't feel like relief. It felt like alignment. Alignment is quieter. It doesn't resolve tension, it removes it. The next morning, another message arrived. This one outlined logistics. Payment schedule, documentation, contact for questions. No negotiation language. No invitation to discuss alternatives. They weren't offering terms. They were executing them. I replied to confirm receipt. Nothing more. Later that day, I took a longer walk. Not to think, to notice how little there was to carry. My steps felt even. Not lighter, not heavier. Even. That evening, I realized something had changed. I wasn't replaying the meeting anymore. Not the room, not Stephen's voice. Those details had lost relevance. Once language takes over, memory steps aside. I slept well. Not deeply, peacefully. The kind of sleep that doesn't need justification. The next message came 2 days later. Confirmation of schedule. Dates, amounts, process. Still no apology. Still no explanation. None would improve anything. I acknowledged receipt. And that was it. I didn't feel like something had ended. I felt like something had been placed back where it belonged. The process would continue without me needing to observe it. That felt right. I closed my laptop and let the evening settle. Some outcomes don't announce themselves. They just arrive, quietly correct. After the logistics were set, the days changed texture. Not direction, texture. There was no longer a sense of waiting for something to conclude. That part was over. What followed wasn't relief. It was space. Space where urgency used to live. I noticed it in small moments. Standing in line without checking my phone, letting emails wait until morning, ending the day without replaying it. Those habits had softened before I realized they were habits. The structure had held. Now it was releasing. One afternoon, I opened my calendar and saw how empty it was. Not dramatically empty, just honest. No placeholders, no tentative holds. I didn't rush to fill it. I let it stay that way. That choice felt important. For a long time, availability had been a form of proof of relevance, of value. Now it wasn't required. Value had already been demonstrated in a way that didn't need repetition. I took a walk later that evening. The light was low, the streets calm. I realized I hadn't thought about what I would say if someone asked me what happened. That question had lost its grip. The story didn't need rehearsing. It didn't need defense. It didn't even need framing. It was complete on its own. That night, I slept without interruption. No checking the time, no waking with thoughts half-formed. Just sleep. The kind that arrives when the mind isn't bracing. The next morning I made coffee and sat quietly. No news awaited. No action required. That wasn't absence. It was closure settling. I thought briefly about the clause again, not with pride, with appreciation. It had done exactly what it was written to do. Not escalate, not punish. Protect. Protection is subtle. It doesn't announce itself until it's needed. And when it works, it leaves very little behind. Later that day, I received a final confirmation. Administrative. Completion of process. Records updated. No additional steps required. I closed the message without emotion. Emotion would have been late. That evening, I cooked a simple meal. Nothing elaborate. I noticed how ordinary it felt. Ordinary is underrated. Ordinary means the system is no longer pressing against you. As night settled, I sat with the lights low and let the quiet stay. I didn't feel like something new had begun. I felt like something unnecessary had ended. The need to stay alert, the habit of readiness, those things had loosened without resistance. I understood then that this wasn't about what I'd gained. It was about what I'd stopped carrying. And once something stops weighing on you, you don't need to name it. You just notice how easily you move without it. It wasn't the silence that marked the separation. It was the absence of reflex. I noticed it one evening when my phone buzzed and I didn't reach for it right away. Not because I was resisting, because nothing inside me leaned forward. For years, every sound had meant something. A request, a shift, a correction waiting to happen. Now it was just a sound. I let it pass. The message could wait. Everything could. That was new. Not dramatic, just unfamiliar. I realized then how much of my identity had been built around readiness. Being available. Being precise. Being one step ahead of what hadn't been asked yet. That posture doesn't leave all at once. It loosens gradually. I felt it in my shoulders first, then in my breathing. Even my thoughts had slowed. Not dull, uncrowded. I walked through the neighborhood as the night settled in. Windows lit, curtains drawn, lives continuing without reference to mine. That didn't feel isolating. It felt appropriate. For a long time, I'd measured days by how needed I was. How many decisions passed through me? Now the day measured itself. Morning, afternoon, evening. No assessment required. I remembered something Stephen had said in the meeting. About alignment, about evolution. At the time, the words had felt rehearsed. Now, stripped of context, they felt empty. Alignment without consent is just movement. Evolution without acknowledgement is erasure. That wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. I understood then that I wasn't stepping away from a role. I was stepping out of a pattern where explanation was expected before protection, where restraint was mistaken for compliance. That pattern had ended the moment language took over. Later that night, I sat at the table with a notebook open. I didn't write. I let the page stay blank. Not because I had nothing to say, because I didn't need to say it yet. Silence can be preparatory without being anxious. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. Sleep came easily. No dreams of meetings, no rehearsed replies. Just rest. In the morning, I woke without orientation. Not lost, unanchored. In a good way. The day didn't ask me who I was before it began. I made breakfast slowly. Watched steam rise, listened to the quiet. I thought about how rarely we allow transitions to be quiet. How often we demand they be justified or declared. This one didn't need that. It was already complete. I didn't feel like I'd left something behind. I felt like I'd been released from it. And that difference mattered. The first invitation didn't feel like one. It arrived as a question. No proposal, no framing, just curiosity. Someone I hadn't spoken to in a while asked whether I was available to talk. No subject line, no urgency. That tone mattered. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was deciding, because I wasn't avoiding anything. I let the evening pass. Made dinner, read a few pages, watched the light shift in the room. When I replied, I kept it simple. Yes, sometime this week. Nothing else. The conversation happened 2 days later. Short, unscripted. They didn't ask what happened. They already knew enough. They asked how I was thinking now. That question surprised me. Not because it was unexpected, because it didn't assume anything had ended. I said I was listening. That felt true. Listening doesn't commit you. It keeps you open. After the call, there was no follow-up email, no next steps. That was intentional. It meant the conversation wasn't transactional. It was exploratory. Later that night, another message came in. Different name, similar tone, a brief note, an open-ended question. No schedule attached. I noticed how my body responded, not with tension, with curiosity. That was new. Curiosity without urgency is rare. I replied the next morning, again simply. I wasn't managing impressions. I wasn't building momentum. I was letting the shape of the moment reveal itself. Over the next week, a few more messages arrived, all similar, quiet, respectful. None of them asked for explanation. None of them referenced Harbor Line. That absence felt deliberate. It told me something important. Whatever people thought, they already understood. I didn't need to supply a narrative. That night, I sat with the lights low and thought about timing. Not deadlines. Timing. The difference is subtle. Deadlines demand. Timing invites. I realized I wasn't ready to step into anything new yet. Not because I was hesitant, because the quiet was still working. You don't interrupt something that's stabilizing. I let the messages rest. No one followed up impatiently. No one pressed. That confirmed the tone. These weren't opportunities trying to capture attention. They were signals. And signals don't repeat themselves loudly. As the week ended, I noticed how grounded I felt. Not anchored to outcome, anchored to presence. That night, I slept easily again. No planning, no anticipation, just rest. The kind that arrives when nothing is pulling at you from the future. The decision didn't arrive as a conclusion. It arrived as ease. I noticed it one morning while standing at the window, coffee cooling in my hand. There was no internal debate, no list of reasons forming, just the quiet sense that something had already aligned. I answered one of the messages, not to accept anything, to acknowledge direction. I said I was open to a conversation when the timing felt right. No specifics, no commitments. They replied later that day, brief, measured. They understood. They appreciated the clarity. No pressure to move forward. That response mattered. It confirmed what I'd sensed. This wasn't about momentum. It was about fit. After that, the messages slowed, not disappeared, settled. We spoke once more. A short call. Focused less on roles and more on boundaries, on what I would not return to, on what conditions would need to be present for me to engage. Nothing was promised. Nothing needed to be. When the call ended, I didn't feel anticipation. I felt closure. That surprised me. Not because something new was certain, because something old was no longer waiting. I spent the rest of the day without checking my phone. There was no reason to. That evening, I took a longer walk. The streets were calm, lights steady. I realized then that I wasn't choosing between options. I was choosing posture, whether to return to readiness or to remain deliberate. The answer was already there. That night I slept deeply, not because the future felt secure, because the present felt settled. In the morning, I noticed how ordinary everything felt. No sense of arrival, just continuity. I understood then that the decision didn't need to be announced. It was already integrated. Once something integrates, it stops asking for attention. It simply holds. The morning came quietly. No notifications, no unfinished threads. Just light moving across the room without asking for anything. I made coffee and let it cool without noticing. There was no reason to hurry. For a long time, mornings had carried weight. They asked questions before the day began. This one didn't. I sat near the window and watched the street wake up. People moving, cars passing, everything continuing without reference to me. That felt right. I thought briefly about Harbor Line, not with resentment, not with satisfaction, just acknowledgement. It had been a place where I learned how language works when it's tested, where restraint matters more than reaction. They had moved early, thinking speed would protect them. What they hadn't accounted for was precision. Precision doesn't rush. It waits. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. Winning is noisy. This wasn't. This was alignment finding its shape. I realized then that nothing in this story ended with confrontation. No raised voices, no final exchange. Just words, written carefully, doing what they were meant to do. I finished my coffee and stood up. The room felt open, not empty, open. I didn't look back because there was nothing pulling me there. Everything important had already been recorded. And once something is recorded properly, it doesn't need repeating. I stepped into the day without urgency, not waiting for permission, not expecting resolution, just moving forward with clarity that didn't need proof. That was enough. The rest would arrive when it was ready, and when it did, it wouldn't need explanation. Because by then, everything that mattered would already be understood.